Arizona all day and looking at different polls. I've only had about a 1 or 2 minute wait, but here in Scottsdale, so far there's all day there's been long lines of folks. So these people just getting here, others being here probably almost like up to like 30 and 40 minutes. And yeah, it's just been interesting because this is definitely a more has a lot more wealth than other areas and other parts of the valley, and it's still seeing a little of gridlock. But so far, from what I'm hearing, for people who have been out today and been casting ballots, they said it's just been really a quick, seamless process, and it's gone pretty well for them. So that's kind of what we're seeing out here in Scottsdale.
And what time do the polls close in Arizona?
So they close actually in 48 minutes. They close at 7 p.m. local time, and so you have a lot of people just like jumping out of cars and Ubers and taxis, as you can see right here, just to get here and drop off their ballots.
And of course, anyone who is in line at the time that the polls close will be allowed to vote. So you may see people waiting there until 8 or 9 local time, depending on how long the lines are.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what we've heard from several court rulings in the past, and that's what the ACLU and also local county recorders and stuff are saying. So if you're here before 7 and you're in line, you're set. But besides that, they've been pretty strict on rules and on filming and just making sure everyone has the proper ballot and identification. But here in Arizona, you can actually take your ballot to any location. So people could go a few miles down the road and go to a spot where it'd be much easier to drop off. But so far we've seen people over here playing music. There's this gentleman over here. I'm not sure what side of the political spectrum he's on, but he's giving away water, or maybe, giving away water and just kind of supporting people out here. But a lot of signs, a lot of activity, a lot of people out here in both, support of Biden and in Trump. And so it's definitely a scene. Yeah, so people have been dropping off their ballots for, I'm not exactly sure since when, sometime in October, but this is up until the last point we can drop off your mail-in ballot. So a lot of times people will, have them laying around and just freak out, but
Election works. Why would you say that Arizona is an important state? I mean, is this a state that usually votes for Republicans but has the potential to vote for Democrats this cycle?
yeah, and that's something that's really been, kind of in the works for a long time here in Arizona. It's really shifting more purple than it's ever been. And a lot of that has to do with just, people, coming from California, moving from more progressive areas to save on taxes and save on things. And because, at times there's a lot of industry and economy here in Arizona. So it's just really definitely changing. But that being said, you have things like Jill McCain not endorsing Trump, at least as far as I knew, she never did. And then Jeff Flake supporting Biden, saying it's the appropriate moral decision for people to do is to not think about party, it's just to think about the politics and how the state of our nation. So those are both Arizona representatives and Arizona senators that were really fought with Trump on a lot of issues. So as much as this is a red state and very libertarian in a lot of its views, there is a very large push to turn certain parts of the state more progressive and turn them blue.
All right. Well, thank you for that report, Lucas. Now we will talk to Dannakanian. He is the editorial director of the Appeals Political Report, And he is someone who can tell us about the important down ballot races. Everyone is focused, obviously, and rightfully on the presidential race, but we're not only voting for president tonight.
Right, that's right, and I wish I was on the street in Arizona reporting on the polls. Unfortunately, I'm talking from home, and you're right that I think still at this moment it's hard to get anyone that interested maybe on things that aren't the presidential election because it's so undecided. But there are hundreds upon hundreds of elections at happening at the county level, at the state level, that are going to shape the levers of jurisdictional authority power over the next 2 to 4 years, and we are going to have to be watching at the state level how state senates and state assemblies flip. So, for instance, in Florida so far, it would appear that from what we're seeing, Republicans are in a fairly strong position to keep the state Senate, which was an outside shot for Democrats. And we'll be watching some of that over the next few hours in places like Minnesota, places like Georgia, places like Arizona. That's really the battle. And then at the county level, so much of what's at stake on criminal justice, on immigration, on transit, on housing is being really shaped by county level elections, things like the DA election in LA, the sheriff election in some Georgia counties. That's really where the policy strength is going to be decided for the very same issues for which at the moment a lot of people care about the presidential election.
Very important in terms of making, national policy, but for people's day-to-day lives, it really is more impacted by who is elected locally or in statewide races, right?
I think that's especially right on some issues, like anything having to do with the criminal legal system, with the size of incarceration, also with immigration enforcement, and issues like that. County governments have really a lot of authority and discretion to shape the way in which issues of prosecution of drug policy are going to be impacted, almost more so on matters relating to incarceration than the criminal justice system, than the federal level. And that's why tonight it's also very important to keep an eye on those elections.
And what would be some of the most important down ballot races that you think people should be watching? Right.
Well, I was just talking about the election, so let me start there. In places like LA, Phoenix, where we were just seeing from Arizona, Austin, or Orlando, there are reform-minded candidates, progressive candidates who are trying to take over the DA offices with this idea that they can push policies that are more in line with shrinking incarceration. For instance, right now at this hour, it looks like the progressive candidate in Orlando, in the Orlando race for prosecutor, is way ahead and will probably win. There's other elections. If you care about immigration, you may want to look at elections in Fort Worth in Texas or in Cobb and Gwinnett County in Georgia, which are really going to decide the fate of very pro-ICE policies that have been implemented in those counties in the past 10, 20 years. If you care about labor rights, you will want to, for instance, look at Prop 22 in California, which is the referendum that would that Uber, Lyft, and other companies of the gig economy are pushing as to how they should classify employees. And maybe as a final example, if you care about voting rights, California has an initiative that's very important that's called Prop 17 that would expand the right to vote to people who are currently on parole, and so expand the right to vote to many people who currently do not have it.
All right, so we'll make sure to, throughout the night, be watching not only for the presidential results, or at least the initial presidential results, since it will likely take days until we know the ultimate victor, but also for the results of all of these down-ballot elections as well. Thank you, Daniel. Next, we will talk to Jason Peters. He is a journalist in Philadelphia, and he can talk to us about the key state of Pennsylvania, which is believed by some to be the linchpin of the Democratic strategy, and how voting has been going on in Philadelphia. Jason?
Hello, Peter. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk a little bit. So, to break down the importance of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania is a very important swing state in American elections, meaning that, like, in 2016, it went to Donald Trump, but that was the first time in several years that the state had elected a Republican. The state had gone to Barack Obama as well as with Clinton's. Beyond that, the two major centers for the Democratic hubs are the cities, Pittsburgh and Pennsylvania. The suburbs switching up and going to Donald Trump is actually what flipped the state red last year, as well as parts of Philadelphia that switched from Barack Obama voters to Donald Trump voters.
So in general, would you say that the person who wins Pennsylvania, and potentially, given that it's an important swing state, the presidential election, it will come down to the strength of the Democrats in cities like Pittsburgh and Philadelphia versus suburbs and rural areas that tend to go toward Trump?
Well, I could give you a little breakdown right here. So in 2016, there were 680,000 total voters in Philadelphia. 560,000 went to Clinton, and about 105,000 went to Trump. That 105 figure is an uptick in the city's voters that went from Obama to Trump in 2016. Those voters came from the whitest and richest neighborhoods in Philadelphia, like South Philly and the Northeast. In 2020, Democrats are looking to see an overall boost in turnout in Philadelphia. The idea is to win back some of the people who went back to Trump using a moderate candidate like Joe Biden, as well as to boost first-time voters and motivate progressives who sat out in 2016. In 2016, about 64% of registered voters came out to the polls in Philly. That's 4 points lower than the 68% that came out in 2008 for Obama, and 2 points lower than came out in 2012. If Philadelphia can somehow boost voter turnout to about 68 to 70% and get about 40 to 50,000 more votes on the Democratic side, it could be enough to snowball the entire state for Democrats. Depends where you are. In Philadelphia, voter suppression comes in the way of like not letting felons vote, making it difficult to access voting places, or making it difficult to register. But early voting has quelled some of that. And there were long lines earlier in the day throughout Philadelphia, big hits for lunch, big hits before work. But unemployment's high, and a lot of people are working from home, so there's not long lines late at night. Like what we're used to seeing, because there is no after work rush. So voting wrapped up about 25 minutes ago. You're seeing people, there being long lines out in rural areas like York County still had long lines as of 8:10. Saw videos of York County. There were long lines throughout the suburbs. I expect an increased voter turnout throughout the state, although numbers are not indicating that for Philadelphia. But the thing that's so tricky about Philadelphia is the early voting. We didn't start counting our ballots for early voting until today because of some law that did not let us count them till today. So 2 million votes that came in early just began to get counted today, and there's absolutely no way they're going to have a final number by the end of tonight.
We're hearing from JEK39, one of the viewers of this program, who lives in the Philadelphia suburbs, and said that they believe that a lot of people in Pennsylvania mailed in votes this year that they wouldn't have normally as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. And so would you say that we're seeing an increased amount of mail-in votes in addition to early voting? Does Pennsylvania have
mail-in
early voting in
early
person
ballot
as well?
Early votings, when I say early voting, I mean mail-in and drop-off. We didn't have a ton of in-person early voting locations, but we had ballot drop-off boxes and mail-in ballots. I consider mail-in ballots early voting because that's something people kept up with. But yeah, a ton, more than 2 million mail-in ballots or quote-unquote early votes.
And you said that these votes will not be counted until
today. They started this morning. They started counting the early ballots this morning. Yep.
Okay. So when do you think we will know who won Pennsylvania based on both the results from voting today and from the mail-in voting?
So this is a very difficult question. Pennsylvania 2020 is Florida 2000. So get ready for some of that. We already have the Trump judiciary. Trump's legal team is already suing several Philadelphia locations for various things and filing complaints about the votes in Philadelphia. One man claimed that he put in a ballot for Trump and it put in a vote for Biden. And even though people are saying that it's like a user error, likely they're asking to throw away the entire machine. We're going to have a lot of back and forth battles like that. Earlier this election cycle, the GOP tried to block drop boxes, but then a conservative judge actually threw out that case, saying that anyone can use the ballot drop boxes and it's all above board.
You for that report, Jason. Now we will talk to BA, an expert on Texas politics. And I think it's interesting because Jason was talking a lot about these legal tactics that Republicans may try to use to get ballots thrown out in Pennsylvania. And BA, as I'm sure you know, we saw very similar issues in Texas. I believe that Republicans, after agreeing to allow people to drive up and deposit their votes, then argued that this should be illegal. And so 100,000 or so votes that people had dropped off should be invalidated. So can you tell us more about that case and about some of these sort of shenanigans that we're seeing in Texas?
Shenanigans is a nice way to put it, definitely. People are taking this as a blatant attack from the Republicans on a county that turned blue in 2016. This is Harris County. Harris County, near Houston, as most people would know, has always kind of teetered between Democratic and Republican, but in 2016, it was completely taken by Clinton. Now, Republicans know going into tonight that this could make or break Texas for Donald Trump. This is the third largest county in the nation. They have nearly 2.5 million registered voters. And again, this is something that is decidedly blue at this point. Democrat leaders are thinking if they can get Harris County to 1 million votes, then Texas is going to flip blue. Now, it was about 127,000 votes that were in jeopardy. This really started late last week. The Republicans tried to go after seeing a really, really big turnout in Texas, just as we're seeing everywhere with early voting, and get those votes thrown out. Initially, the U.S. District Court, they weren't having that, and Republicans tried to file it again, where the Fifth Circuit had ruled on Monday evening, so this was last night, the night before an election, that these 127,000 votes that were made through or had been cast at these drive-through locations would not be valid. They would be invalidated. And the plaintiffs were saying a few different things, right? 9 out of the 10 drive-through locations, they weren't necessarily buildings. They weren't structures. They're made up of tents. So that was kind of their argument as to why these places aren't valid. Another thing is, we're in the middle of a pandemic. So people are really trying to be safe, secure. You have doctors, you have people who are essential workers that want to get out the vote, but they don't want to walk into a polling place. So drive-through voting locations are really, really critical during a pandemic. But they're also saying that this doesn't count as a disability. Voters, just because they're scared of a pandemic or scared of a virus, doesn't mean that it's legitimate for them to be casting their vote through drive-through location. So these were some of the arguments that they were throwing out there. And again, it just got shut down last night. So those 127,000 votes will be counted. And again, when you're talking about 1.7, 1.8 million votes that could potentially turn an election and win the White House, it's a really big deal, 127,000 votes. Now, as of about like 4 or 5 p.m., they had already crossed the 1.5 million vote mark. So I'm excited. Once I get off here, I'm going to kind of check that again. But I wouldn't be surprised if Harris County helps make this happen for the Democrats. And
do you think that it's possible Texas will flip? I mean, Texas has, traditionally been seen as a very red state, easy pickings for Republicans. But many people, including some of our commenters now, say that they believe Texas will flip. What do you think is the possibility of that?
It is a huge possibility. They say football is a game of inches. Well, this is just a game of a few votes at this point. In Texas, there are 17 million registered voters. Nearly 10 million of those had already voted in the early ballot. So, and that was 2 points shy of 2016. So we're already on track, like I said, very similar to the rest of the country, going into what is usually considered a non-voting state. We don't get a real high voter turnout. About 30% of our voters are Latino voters, which we can get into that conversation and go down that rabbit hole as well. But also, we have some of the tightest voting restrictions in Texas. So it's not necessarily easy for people to go out and cast their votes and have their voice heard. Now, when we're looking at if this is going to be turned into a blue state tonight, we also have to consider the down ballot and the down tickets as well. This isn't something that's happened overnight. A lot of us aren't shocked at what is happening in Texas right now. This has been a culmination of many, many years. You could go back over a decade and see that these margins are getting smaller and smaller by each presidential election. But when you consider the past 4 years, and especially the past 2 years, it kind of really started with Beto O'Rourke on a national visibility scale. Julian Castro has been incremental in putting eyes on Texas and the Democratic Party, but also the DNC is spending so much money to mobilize and organize voters and educate the public on why they should be voting and why that is important. That has been tremendous for all of the candidates. You guys have noticed Biden hasn't really even been down to Texas. Harris went, the DNC chair went, but they have so much momentum coming off of the education, the money, and the resources that they have put in not only into voters, but women of color as well, to mobilize the state of Texas and possibly go blue tonight.
And I mean, a lot of that, I think, would come down to the Latino vote in Texas, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is that a reliable Democratic voting bloc?
Reliable's, I wouldn't necessarily call it reliable or unreliable. They haven't been engaged. They haven't been courted. I think we're seeing, no doubt, a higher turnout by the youth vote because they realize that history is not only being made tonight, history is about to be made for potentially years, potentially decades to come, and they're really recognizing this opportunity. When the Latino voters were surveyed in Texas, about 90% of them said that it was a University of Houston survey and Univision, and 90% of those Texas Latino voters said that they will or quite possibly will vote in the election. That's huge. 79% of them said this election is far more important than even the 2016 election. So they're definitely waking up, but we're also looking at a electorate that isn't a monolith, and people are starting to catch on to that, but they're really not understanding how to talk to all of the 32 million eligible Latino voters across the country and really engage with them properly. So yes, I think we're going to see a higher turnout. That's definitely going to make a difference tonight. But it's also, we're not quite there yet with what the potential that's left on the table for upcoming elections, especially in the midterm 2022 and then 2024. I hope to God we can all get it together and start talking to Latinos and the Hispanic voters properly.
So even if Texas doesn't end up going blue this year, it certainly may in 2022 and 2024. Thank you for that report, B.A. Now, I think that we are unfortunately out of time, but I want to thank B.A., Jason, Dan, and Lucas for contributing their expertise and their on-the-ground reporting to this program. Now I will throw it over to Andy, who is anchoring HAPS News' continuing coverage of Election Night 2020. Thank you.